The gunshot that shattered the morning silence wasn't meant to kill anyone, but it changed everything nonetheless. Fletcher Lancaster stood in the doorway of his father's study, watching the older man lower his Colt revolver after firing a warning shot into the ceiling beam. Plaster dust settling like snow on the Persian rug below. It was May 1878, and the Lancaster Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime California grassland just outside Columbia. But in that moment, the whole world had shrunk to the rage in his father's eyes, and the name that had just passed Fletcher's lips. "You will not speak of that girl again under my roof," Reginald Lancaster said, his voice deadly calm now that the explosion had passed. "Catherine Nolan is beneath you, beneath this family, and beneath everything I have built." Fletcher's jaw tightened. He was 22 years old, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that proved he wasn't just some rancher's son playing at being a cowboy. He had earned every acre of this land alongside his father, breaking horses, mending fences, driving cattle through drought and flood. But none of that mattered now. "Her father works for us," Reginald continued, holstering his pistol. "Patrick Nolan is a stable hand. A drunk Irish immigrant who can barely keep his daughter fed. The Lancaster name means something in this territory, and I will not have you dragging it through the mud for some passing fancy." "It's not a passing fancy," Fletcher said quietly, and something in his tone made his father's eyes narrow. "How long?" "6 months." The slap came so fast Fletcher barely saw it coming. His head snapped to the side, cheek burning, but he didn't raise a hand to defend himself. Instead, he met his father's gaze steadily, and that seemed to enrage Reginald even more than defiance would have. "You have been sneaking around with the stable hand's daughter for 6 months, Reginald said slowly, "and you thought I wouldn't find out. I know everything that happens on this ranch, boy, everything. Then you know I love her." Another silence, this one somehow worse than the gunshot. Through the window, Fletcher could see the ranch spreading out in the golden morning light. The corrals and outbuildings, the main barn where Catherine's father worked, and beyond that, the small cabin where she lived. She would be up by now, making breakfast on the wood stove, probably wondering why he hadn't come by with the excuse of checking on the horses like he usually did. They had been careful, so careful. Meeting in the far pastures after dark, stealing moments in the tack room when everyone else was at supper, riding out to the creek that marked the northern boundary of Lancaster land, where no one had any reason to go. Fletcher had never felt anything like what he felt when Catherine smiled at him, her dark hair coming loose from its pins, her green eyes bright with laughter. She was 19, sharp as a tack despite having only 3 years of schooling, and she could ride better than half the men his father employed. "Love," Reginald said, and the word dripped with contempt. "You don't know what love is. You know what lust is, what rebellion is. You want to hurt me for pushing you too hard, for expecting too much. So you found the one girl on this ranch guaranteed to cause the biggest scandal. This has nothing to do with you. Everything you do has to do with me. You are my son, my only son, and you will inherit this ranch when I'm gone. But not if you marry some Irish immigrant's daughter. I will sell every acre, every head of cattle before I let that happen." Fletcher's hands clenched at his sides. "You would destroy everything you built out of spite." "I would destroy it to save it from you." Reginald moved to the window, his back straight despite his 57 years. "I came west with nothing, Fletcher. I worked myself half to death turning this land into something that mattered. I want you to have more than I did, to marry well, to build on what I have started. There are ranchers with daughters who would be suitable matches. The Cartwrights have that girl Eleanor, The Hendersons have 2 daughters of marrying age. Any of them would bring land, money, connections. I don't want them, I want Catherine. Then you are a fool. Reginald turned back to face him. Here is what will happen. You will go to the Nolan cabin and you will end this nonsense. Today. I will not have her fired because I am not a cruel man, but you will stay away from her. In 6 months, when you have come to your senses, we will discuss suitable arrangements for your future. Do you understand? Fletcher understood perfectly. He understood that his father would never change his mind, never see past the social barriers that meant everything to him. He understood that there was no compromise possible, no middle ground, and he understood with crystal clarity that he had a choice to make. I understand, he said, and turned to leave. Fletcher. His father's voice stopped him at the door. I mean what I say. If you defy me on this, you will have nothing. No ranch, no inheritance, no family. You will be cut off completely. I understand, Fletcher repeated and walked out into the morning sunshine. The walk to the Nolan cabin felt both too long and too short. Fletcher's mind raced as he crossed the packed earth of the ranch yard, nodding absently to the hands already at work. He had grown up on this land. Every fence post, every water trough, every tree planted as a windbreak held memories. His mother had died when he was 7, and his father had poured all his grief and ambition into making the ranch into an empire. Fletcher had spent his childhood trying to earn approval that never quite came, working harder than any hired hand, learning every aspect of ranch management, preparing to be the son his father wanted. But Catherine had shown him something different. When he was with her, he wasn't the Lancaster heir, weighed down by expectations and duty. He was just Fletcher, and that was enough. She listened when he talked about wanting to try new breeding techniques, about his ideas for water conservation, about the books he read by lamplight when everyone else was asleep. She told him about the horses she dreamed of training, about the wild places in Ireland her father described when he was sober, about the freedom she felt riding across open country. They had fallen in love so gradually that Fletcher couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened. One day she was just Patrick Nolan's daughter, another face around the ranch. The next, she was everything. The cabin was small but well kept, white paint peeling only slightly on the shutters, a vegetable garden thriving beside the door. Fletcher knocked, his heart hammering, and Catherine opened it with a smile that died when she saw his face. What happened? She stepped outside immediately, pulling the door closed behind her. She wore a simple blue dress, an apron tied around her waist, and her dark hair was braided down her back. Even in distress, she was the most beautiful thing Fletcher had ever seen. He knows, Fletcher said simply. Catherine's face went pale. How? I don't know. It doesn't matter. He took her hands, not caring if anyone saw. Catherine, he has forbidden me to see you. He said I have to choose between you and the ranch. Then there is no choice. Her voice was steady, but he could see tears gathering in her eyes. Fletcher, you cannot give up everything for me. This is your inheritance, your future. You are my future. I am a stable hand's daughter with no prospects and no dowry. She pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. Your father is right. A match between us makes no sense. You should marry someone who can help you build something, not drag you down. Do you love me? Fletcher asked. The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. A tear spilled down her cheek. That doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. Do you love me, Catherine? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. God help me, yes. Then that's enough. Fletcher reached for her again, and this time she didn't pull away. I don't care about the ranch, about the money, about any of it. I care about you. We can build something together, something that is ours. Where would we even go? What would we do? Fletcher, be sensible. I have been sensible my entire life." He cupped her face in his hands, wiping away tears with his thumbs. "I have done everything my father asked, been exactly who he wanted me to be, and it has never been enough. I am tired of living for his approval. I want to live for us." Catherine searched his face, and he could see the war being waged behind her eyes. She was practical, had to be after growing up the way she had, and every practical bone in her body was screaming at her to send him away. But there was something else there too, something fierce and hopeful that matched what he felt. "If we do this," she said slowly, "there is no going back. Your father will disown you, people in town will talk. It will be hard, Fletcher, harder than anything you have known. I know. We would have to leave Columbia, start somewhere new. I know. You might come to resent me when things get difficult, when you remember what you gave up." Fletcher leaned forward and kissed her, soft and sure, and felt her melt against him. When he pulled back, he said, "The only thing I would ever resent is a life without you in it. So what do you say, Catherine Nolan? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with no inheritance and a talent for breaking his father's heart?" She laughed through her tears, and the sound was like music. "You are completely mad. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes, you fool." She kissed him again, harder this time, and Fletcher felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. "So what do we do now? Now we run." He grinned at her expression. "I have money saved, enough to get us started somewhere else. There are opportunities in Oregon, in Montana, places where we can stake a claim, build something from nothing. It won't be easy, but we will be together." "My father," Catherine said suddenly. "I cannot just leave him." Fletcher sobered. Patrick Nolan was a difficult man, prone to drinking and dark moods, but he was still her father. "We can talk to him together." They found Patrick in the barn, mucking out stalls with the deliberate care of a man nursing a hangover. He looked up when they approached, his weathered face creasing into a frown when he saw Fletcher holding his daughter's hand. "Mr. Nolan," Fletcher said formally, "I would like to ask for Catherine's hand in marriage." Patrick stared at him for a long moment, then set down his pitchfork. "Does your father know about this?" "He does now. He has forbidden the match. Smart man." Patrick spat into the straw. "What makes you think I would let my daughter tie herself to a rancher's son playing at rebellion? You will go crawling back to your father in a month, and where will that leave Catherine?" "I will never go back," Fletcher said steadily. "With or without your blessing, I intend to marry your daughter and build a life with her, but I am hoping you will give us your blessing." Patrick looked at Catherine. "Is this what you want, girl?" "It is, Da. You know what you will be giving up? The security of the ranch, the protection of the Lancaster name." "I am giving up nothing I ever had," Catherine said quietly, "and gaining everything I ever wanted." Something in Patrick's hard expression softened. He reached out and touched his daughter's cheek, a rare gesture of affection. "You have your mother's heart," he said gruffly. "Too big and too brave for this world. All right, then. You have my blessing, though I think you are both fools." "When do you leave?" "Today," Fletcher said. "My father will not give us another chance." "Today?" Patrick looked stricken. "Catherine, that is so soon, I know." She hugged him tightly. "But it has to be this way. You could come with us, Da, start fresh somewhere new." Patrick shook his head. "I am too old and too set in my ways. This ranch is all I know. But you write to me, let me know where you land. And if that young fool ever treats you wrong, you send word and I will come, no matter how far." They spent the next few hours in a flurry of preparation. Catherine packed what few possessions she had into a battered carpet bag, while Fletcher returned to the main house, moving quickly before his father could intercept him. He gathered his savings from the tin box under his bed, along with clothes, a spare rifle, and the pocket watch his mother had given him the year before she died. He left everything else, even the things he had earned himself, because he wanted nothing that would give his father leverage. He was saddling his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Rosie, when his father appeared in the stable doorway. "So you are really doing this," Reginald said. Fletcher didn't look up from checking the cinch. "I told you I would. I thought I raised you to be smarter than this. To think with your head instead of other parts of your anatomy. You raised me to work hard and stand by my convictions. I am doing both." Reginald moved closer and Fletcher tensed, but his father just stood there, looking older than he had that morning. "If you walk away now, you will have nothing. No money, no prospects, no way to support a wife. What kind of life can you give her? A life where she is loved and valued. That is more than some ranch wives get." Fletcher swung up into the saddle. "I am sorry, father. Sorry I am not the son you wanted. But I cannot be sorry for loving Catherine. You are throwing away everything for a girl you barely know. I know her better than I have ever known anyone. And I would rather build something small and real with her than inherit an empire that means nothing without someone to share it with." For a moment, Fletcher thought he saw something like grief in his father's eyes. But then Reginald's expression hardened again. "Get off my land. And don't come back." "I won't," Fletcher said, and rode toward the Nolan cabin, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken. Catherine was waiting outside, her carpetbag at her feet, wearing a riding skirt and sturdy boots. Fletcher had arranged for one of the gentler horses to be saddled for her, a gray gelding named Smoke. Her father stood beside her, and when Fletcher dismounted to help Catherine up, Patrick grabbed his arm. "You take care of her," Patrick said, his voice rough. "Or I swear to God, Lancaster, no matter what your family name is, I will hunt you down." "I will take care of her," Fletcher promised. "I swear it." They rode out of the ranch just after noon, heading north toward the main road. Fletcher didn't look back, though he could feel the weight of his father's gaze like a physical thing. Beside him, Catherine sat straight in the saddle, her face set with determination, but he could see the tears tracking down her cheeks. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Just saying goodbye." They rode in silence for a while, putting distance between themselves and Columbia. The California landscape spread out around them, golden grass and scattered oaks, the Sierra Nevada mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful country, and Fletcher felt a pang leaving it behind. But when he looked at Catherine, the pang eased. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was her. By evening, they had reached a small town called Angel's Camp, about 15 miles northeast of Columbia. They found a boarding house that would rent them a room, the proprietor looking at them with barely disguised curiosity. Fletcher paid for one night and dinner, watching his carefully saved money dwindle with each coin. In their small room upstairs, Catherine sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him with wide eyes. "We are really doing this." "We are." Fletcher sat beside her, taking her hand. "Catherine, I know this isn't how you probably dreamed your wedding would be. We should have a church, flowers, your father walking you down the aisle. But I promise you, when we get settled somewhere, we will do this properly. I will marry you in front of God and everyone." "I don't need flowers or a church," Catherine said. "I just need you to be sure." "Really sure, Fletcher? Because once we are married, there truly is no going back." In answer, Fletcher pulled out his mother's pocket watch and opened it. Inside the cover was a photograph of her, young and smiling, and his father looking almost happy. "My mother gave this to me the year she died," he said. "She told me that love was the only thing worth fighting for, that everything else was just noise. I didn't understand what she meant then, but I do now." Catherine touched the photograph gently. "She was beautiful. So are you." Fletcher closed the watch and set it aside. "I am sure, Catherine. I have never been more sure of anything." She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet, and whispered, "Then ask me properly." Fletcher slid off the bed and onto one knee, still holding her hand. "Catherine Nolan, you are the bravest, kindest, most extraordinary person I have ever known. I don't have a ring, and I don't have much to offer you except my heart and my promise to work every day to give you the life you deserve. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, pulling him up and into her arms. "Yes, Fletcher Lancaster, I will marry you." They found a minister the next morning, an elderly Methodist preacher who asked no questions when Fletcher explained they wanted to be married quickly. He called in his housekeeper and her husband to serve as witnesses, and in a small parlor that smelled of lemon oil and old books, Fletcher and Catherine were wed. The ceremony took less than 20 minutes, but when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher felt like his entire world had shifted into place. Catherine Lancaster. She had a new name now, one that connected her to him rather than to his father's disapproval. When they walked out into the sunshine, Fletcher felt lighter than he had in years. "Where do we go from here?" Catherine asked, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "North," Fletcher decided. "I have heard there is good land in Oregon, opportunities for people willing to work hard. We can stake a claim, build a cabin, start a small ranch of our own. How long will it take to get there? 6 weeks, maybe more." He looked at their horses, at his dwindling money. "We will need supplies, and we should probably travel with a wagon train if we can find one. It's safer." They spent the rest of the day purchasing necessities. A sturdy tent, cooking supplies, extra ammunition, dried food that would last the journey. Fletcher watched their funds shrink with each purchase, but Catherine was practical, negotiating prices and suggesting alternatives when he was willing to pay too much. By the time they were done, they had spent more than half their money, but they had what they needed to survive. That night in their rented room, they consummated their marriage. Fletcher was gentle, mindful of Catherine's inexperience, and when she cried out his name, he felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. This woman was his now, his wife, his partner, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted choosing him. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Catherine traced patterns on his chest and said, "You think your father will ever forgive you?" "I don't know," Fletcher admitted. "Part of me hopes he will someday, but I am not going to spend my life waiting for his approval. What if we fail? What if we get to Oregon and cannot make it work? Then we will try somewhere else, and if that doesn't work, we will try again. We are young, Catherine. We have time to make mistakes and learn from them." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, we have each other. That is more than a lot of people can say." They left Angel's Camp at dawn, heading north toward Sacramento. Fletcher had learned there were wagon trains forming there for the journey to Oregon, and he wanted to join one if possible. The roads were rough, little more than dirt tracks in places, and they had to ford several creeks swollen with spring runoff. Catherine proved to be an excellent rider, keeping pace without complaint, and at night she cooked their simple meals over a campfire with the efficiency of long practice. On the third day, they were approached by a group of riders. Fletcher's hand went instinctively to his rifle, but the men proved friendly enough, just cowboys moving cattle north to new grazing land. They shared a meal and news, and one of them, a grizzled man named Henry, gave Fletcher some advice. "You heading to Oregon?" Henry asked, taking in their youth and light supplies. "We are," Fletcher confirmed. "Good land up there, plenty of opportunity. But it is a hard journey. Make sure you travel with others and watch out for the mountain passes. Snow lingers laid up high." He looked at Catherine, who was washing dishes in a nearby stream. "That your wife?" "She is. You are lucky. Pretty girl, and she looks like she can handle herself. You will need that." Henry spat into the fire. "Word of advice, son. When things get hard, and they will, Remember why you started this journey. A lot of couples don't make it because they forget what they are fighting for. Fletcher thought about that as they continued north. He and Catherine were still in the honeymoon phase, everything new and exciting, but he knew the reality would set in soon enough. They were running on hope and determination, but those would only carry them so far. They reached Sacramento 2 weeks after leaving Angel's Camp. The city was booming, full of people seeking fortune in the gold fields or heading west to Oregon and Washington. They found a wagon train preparing to leave in 3 days, led by a seasoned guide named Marcus Webb. Fletcher paid the fee to join, and they spent the intervening days making final preparations and getting to know their fellow travelers. There were 12 wagons in total, carrying families and young couples like themselves, all seeking new opportunities in the Oregon Territory. Fletcher and Catherine didn't have a wagon, just their horses and supplies packed on a mule they had purchased in Sacramento, but Webb said that was fine as long as they could keep up and contribute to the group's welfare. The journey began on a bright June morning. The wagon train moved slowly, covering perhaps 15 miles a day over relatively flat terrain. Fletcher and Catherine rode alongside the wagons, helping where they could, and at night they pitched their tent near the other families. It was hard work, but there was a sense of camaraderie among the travelers, everyone united by a common goal. Catherine proved invaluable. She had a way with horses and helped several families with their teams. She also assisted with cooking and caring for the children, earning the gratitude and friendship of the other women. Fletcher watched her thrive in this environment, her natural competence and warmth making her popular among the group. 3 weeks into the journey, they reached the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The terrain grew steeper, the days hotter, and tempers began to fray. One family's wagon broke an axle, requiring a full day to repair. A woman gave birth prematurely, and though the baby survived, the mother needed time to recover. The easy optimism of the first weeks gave way to grim determination. Fletcher and Catherine had their first real argument on the banks of a river they needed to cross. The current was swift, swollen with snowmelt, and Fletcher wanted Catherine to ride across with one of the families in a wagon where she would be safer. Catherine insisted she could manage her horse just fine. "I am not some delicate flower that needs protecting," she said, her green eyes flashing. "I have been riding since I was 6 years old." "I know that," Fletcher said, struggling to keep his voice level, "but the current is stronger than it looks, and I would feel better if you were in a wagon. What you mean is you don't trust me to handle myself." "That is not what I mean at all." "Then what, Fletcher? Because it sounds like you are treating me like a child." They stood there, glaring at each other until Marcus Webb walked over. "Problem?" "No," they said in unison. Webb looked between them and shook his head. "First real fight, I am guessing." "Listen, son, your wife is a better rider than half the men here. Let her cross on her own if she wants. And you, missus, maybe cut your husband some slack. He is just worried about you, which is what a good husband does." They crossed the river separately, Catherine managing her horse with skill, and Fletcher felt foolish for doubting her. That night in their tent, he apologized. "I am sorry," he said. "You were right. I was being overprotective." "And I am sorry for snapping at you," Catherine replied. "I know you were just worried. I am not used to having someone care that much." They made love that night with a new intensity, as if the argument had burned away some pretense between them, leaving only raw honesty. And afterward, Fletcher realized that this was what building a life together meant. Not just the easy moments, but working through the hard ones too. The Sierra Nevada crossing took 2 weeks of grueling travel. They followed a route through a pass that required wagons to be lowered down steep slopes with ropes, horses to be led carefully along narrow trails. One wagon slipped and tumbled down a ravine, though thankfully no one was seriously hurt. The nights were cold despite the summer season, and they huddled together for warmth. On the western side of the mountains, the terrain eased, and they entered a vast valley that stretched north as far as the eye could see. The land here was different from California, greener and cooler, with forests of towering trees and clear streams. Fletcher could see why people were drawn to Oregon. It felt like a place where anything was possible. They reached the Willamette Valley in late August, the wagon train dispersing as families headed to their various destinations. Fletcher and Catherine continued north toward Portland, where Fletcher hoped to find work and gather information about available land. Their money was almost gone, and they needed to establish themselves quickly. Portland was a rough frontier town, barely more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a river port. But it was growing fast, and there was work available for anyone willing to do it. Fletcher found employment at a lumber mill, hard physical labor that paid decent wages. Catherine took in laundry and mending, working from a small room they rented above a general store. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined. The work was exhausting, the living conditions cramped, and there were times when Fletcher wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He had given up a ranch, wealth, and security for this, working dawn to dusk for barely enough money to survive. But then he would come home to their small room and find Catherine waiting, and all the doubts would fade. She would have dinner ready, usually something simple but nourishing, and they would eat together and talk about their day. She never complained, never suggested they had made the wrong choice. Her faith in him, in their future, kept Fletcher going when his body wanted to quit. 6 months after arriving in Portland, they had saved enough money for a down payment on land. Fletcher found 160 acres about 20 miles south of the city, near a small settlement called Oregon City. The land had a creek running through it, stands of timber, and enough open meadow for grazing. The previous owner had started a cabin but abandoned it halfway through, leaving it for Fletcher to complete. They moved onto the land in early spring of 1879, nearly a year after leaving California. The cabin was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, no windows or proper door, but it was theirs. Fletcher spent his days finishing the cabin and clearing land for planting while Catherine established a vegetable garden and began sewing curtains and linens to make the place more like a home. The work was brutally hard. Fletcher's hands, already calloused from ranch work, developed new layers of hardness from swinging an axe and hauling logs. Catherine's graceful fingers grew rough from scrubbing clothes in the creek and kneading bread dough. But slowly, steadily, the homestead began to take shape. Their nearest neighbors were a family named the Thompsons, settlers from Missouri who had arrived 2 years earlier. James Thompson was a weathered man in his 40s with a practical wife named Ruth and 3 teenage children. They came by to welcome Fletcher and Catherine, bringing fresh eggs and helpful advice about surviving Oregon winters. "You will want to get more firewood laid by than you think you need," James told Fletcher as they walked the property together. "Winters here are wet and cold. And make sure your roof doesn't leak. Nothing worse than being stuck inside for weeks with water dripping through. You will need to preserve everything you can from your garden," Ruth told Catherine. "Canning, drying, whatever you can manage. The growing season is good here, but winter lasts a long time." The Thompsons became good friends, helping with the heavy work of building and offering guidance that saved Fletcher and Catherine from numerous mistakes. In return, Fletcher helped James repair his barn and Catherine taught Ruth's daughter Abigail how to do fine needlework. By summer, the cabin was finished. It was small, just 2 rooms, but it had glass windows that Fletcher had traded labor for, a stone fireplace that drew properly, and a solid roof that kept the rain out. Catherine made it beautiful with simple touches: wildflowers in a jar on the table, bright quilts on the bed, curtains that caught the morning light. They were eating dinner one evening in July when Catherine set down her fork and said, "Fletcher, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made him look up immediately. "What is it?" "I am pregnant." For a moment, Fletcher couldn't breathe. Then he was around the table, pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." She was crying too, but smiling. "The baby should come in February, I think." "A baby?" Fletcher pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. "Catherine, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, a touch of uncertainty in her voice. "I know we are still getting established and money is tight." "I am happy," he said fiercely. "I am so happy I could burst. This is everything, Catherine. You and me and our child building a life here. This is exactly what I wanted." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, excited and terrified in equal measure. They would need more supplies: baby clothes and blankets and a cradle. Fletcher would need to hunt more to build up their stores of meat. Catherine would need to take it easier, though Fletcher suspected getting her to slow down would be like trying to stop the creek from flowing. The pregnancy was difficult. Catherine suffered from sickness in the early months, barely able to keep food down. Fletcher worried constantly, but Ruth Thompson proved to be a blessing, coming by regularly with remedies and reassurance. As Catherine's belly grew, she had to give up some of the heavier work, which frustrated her but was necessary. Winter arrived early and hard. By November, snow was falling regularly and the temperature dropped below freezing. Fletcher worked from dawn to dusk, chopping firewood, caring for their small herd of chickens, and making sure everything was secured against the storms. Inside, Catherine sewed baby clothes and organized their supplies, her belly now round and prominent. Christmas came and went quietly. They had little money for celebration, but Fletcher carved a small wooden horse for the baby, and Catherine made him a warm scarf from wool she had traded eggs for. They attended a church service in Oregon City on Christmas Eve, the small building packed with settlers seeking community and comfort. On a bitter cold night in late February, Catherine's labor began. Fletcher rode through darkness and snow to fetch Ruth Thompson, his heart in his throat, praying he wouldn't be too late. Ruth came immediately, bringing her daughter Abigail to help, and they took over the cabin with the calm efficiency of experienced women. Fletcher was banished to the main room while the women worked in the bedroom. He paced, fed the fire, and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here with no doctor nearby. Women died, babies died, and Fletcher had never felt so helpless in his life. The night seemed to last forever. Catherine's cries tore at him, and he wanted to go to her, but Ruth had been firm. "You will just be in the way. Let us do our work." Finally, as dawn light began filtering through the windows, he heard it. A baby's cry, thin and angry and utterly beautiful. Fletcher was through the bedroom door before anyone could stop him, and there was Catherine, pale and exhausted but alive, holding a tiny bundle. "It's a boy," she said, her voice hoarse. "Fletcher, we have a son." He moved to the bedside, looking down at the tiny red face, the miniature hands waving in the air. His son. Their son. Fletcher felt tears streaming down his face and didn't care. "He's perfect," Fletcher whispered. "You are perfect, Catherine. I love you so much." "Help me sit up," she said, and with Fletcher supporting her, she managed to get upright. Ruth and Abigail were cleaning up, giving the new family privacy. What should we name him? They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son, Fletcher said, "What about Thomas? After your mother's father?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Her grandfather had been one of the few bright spots in her difficult childhood, dying when she was 8. Thomas Lancaster, I like that. Thomas was a good baby as far as Fletcher could tell, though he had no experience to compare. He ate well, slept reasonably, and seemed healthy despite being born in the dead of winter. Catherine took to motherhood with the same competence she brought to everything, though Fletcher could see the exhaustion wearing on her. He tried to help as much as he could, walking Thomas when he fussed at night, changing diapers, doing extra work so Catherine could rest. They stumbled through those early months in a haze of sleeplessness and wonder, learning as they went. Spring arrived, and with it, new challenges. Their money was almost gone, and they needed to plant crops and expand their livestock if they were going to survive. Fletcher took on work with other settlers, helping with planting and fence building in exchange for seeds and young animals. Catherine resumed taking in mending, working while Thomas napped. It was harder than anything Fletcher had imagined. There were days when he was so tired he could barely stand, when every muscle ached and the future seemed impossibly distant. But then he would come home to Catherine and Thomas, and the weight would ease. This was what he was working for, not wealth or status, but the simple miracle of his family. One evening in April, Fletcher was repairing the chicken coop when a horse approached. He looked up, squinting into the setting sun, and his heart stopped. Even from a distance he recognized the rider's bearing, the quality of the horse. His father had found them. Reginald Lancaster dismounted slowly, looking around at the small cabin, the rough outbuildings, the muddy yard. His expression was unreadable. Fletcher set down his tools and walked to meet him, his mind racing. "Father, Fletcher." Reginald studied him, taking in the worn clothes, the calloused hands, the deeper lines around his eyes. "You look like hell. It has been a long year." Fletcher crossed his arms, defensive. "How did you find us? I have resources, and I have been looking since you left." Reginald gestured at the homestead. "This is what you left everything for, a shack in the wilderness." "It is not a shack, it is a home. It is barely standing." Fletcher felt anger rising but tamped it down. "Why are you here, Father? If you came to gloat, you have had your moment." "We are surviving, and we will continue to survive, with or without your approval." Before Reginald could respond, the cabin door opened and Catherine emerged, Thomas in her arms. She saw their visitor and froze, her eyes going wide. Fletcher moved to her immediately, taking her hand. "Catherine, this is my father. Father, my wife, Catherine, and my son, Thomas." Reginald stared at the baby, something shifting in his face. "A grandson." "You have a grandson," Fletcher confirmed. "And before you say anything cruel about his mother, remember that you are standing on our land, and I will not tolerate disrespect toward my family." "I didn't come here to be cruel." Reginald's voice was rough. "I came because I am a stubborn old fool who has spent the last year realizing he made a mistake." The words hung in the air. Fletcher wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "What? I was wrong." Reginald looked at Catherine, really looked at her, and seemed to see something that satisfied him. "I was so focused on what I thought was right, on maintaining appearances and social standing, that I drove away my only son. I told myself you would come back, that you were just being rebellious, but you didn't come back. And as the months passed, I realized that maybe you weren't the one who was wrong. Maybe it was me." Catherine shifted Thomas in her arms, her expression wary. Fletcher didn't blame her. This man had caused them so much pain, had forced them to leave everything behind. "Catherine Nolan told me about the baby," Reginald continued. "He came to me 3 weeks ago, said I had a grandchild I had never met. He asked if I was going to let pride cost me what was left of my family. It made me think about your mother, Fletcher. About what she would say if she could see what I have done. Mother would have loved Catherine, Fletcher said quietly. She would have seen what I see, someone brave and kind and strong. I am beginning to see it too. Reginald looked around again, and this time Fletcher thought he detected something like respect in his father's expression. You have built something here. It is rough, but it is honest. More honest than half the marriages in Colombia, where people wed for money and status and call it respectable. Are you saying you approve now? There was bitterness in Fletcher's voice. I am saying I was wrong to forbid you. I am saying I want to know my grandson, and I am saying. Reginald paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I am saying I am sorry, Fletcher. I am sorry for giving you an impossible choice. I am sorry for valuing the wrong things, and I am hoping, though I don't deserve it, that you might forgive me. Fletcher felt Catherine squeeze his hand. He looked at her, and she gave him a small nod. She would support whatever decision he made. I want to forgive you, Fletcher said slowly, but I need to know this is real, that you are not going to take it back the moment we disappoint you again. It's real. Reginald stepped closer. Fletcher, I have had a year to think about what matters. The ranch feels empty without you. Money feels meaningless when there is no family to share it with. I was building an empire for you, but I never stopped to ask if it was what you wanted. I am done making that mistake. What about Catherine? If we forgive you, if we let you be part of Thomas's life, you have to truly accept her. Not as some unfortunate choice I made, but as my wife, my partner, the love of my life. Reginald turned to Catherine. Mrs. Lancaster, I judged you without knowing you. I saw only your father's station and ignored everything else. That was wrong of me, and I apologize. If you and Fletcher are willing to give me a second chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I have changed. Catherine looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes steady. Finally, she said, I am willing to try, Mr. Lancaster, for Fletcher's sake and for Thomas's. But you need to understand something. Fletcher chose me when it cost him everything. I will not let you hurt him again. Fair enough. Reginald almost smiled. You are exactly what I would want in a daughter-in-law if I had been smart enough to see it from the start. They invited Reginald to stay for dinner, though it was a simple meal of bread, beans, and venison stew. Thomas fussed in Catherine's arms, and Reginald asked to hold him. Fletcher watched, heart in his throat, as his father cradled the baby with surprising gentleness. He looks like you did, Reginald said softly. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. Your mother would have adored him. I wish she could have met him, Fletcher said. So do I. Over the next few days, Reginald stayed in Oregon City but visited daily. He was careful not to overstep, not to make demands or judgments. He listened when Fletcher and Catherine talked about their struggles and their plans. He offered help, but in a way that felt like support rather than control. Finally, sitting on the porch steps one evening while Catherine fed Thomas inside, Reginald said, I have a proposition for you. Fletcher tensed. What kind of proposition? The ranch is too much for me to manage alone. I am getting older and I need someone I can trust to help run it. I know you have built something here and I am not asking you to give it up. But I am asking if you would consider coming back to Colombia, bringing your family and working the ranch with me. Not as my employee, but as my partner. Equal shares, equal say in decisions. Father. Before you refuse, hear me out. You and Catherine could have the house I built for you when you turned 21, the one I never gave you because I was too proud. You would have financial security, resources to give Thomas and any other children the best opportunities. And I would have my family back. Fletcher shook his head. We cannot go back. Too much has happened. I am not asking you to go back. I am asking you to come home, but on your terms. Catherine would be welcomed, treated with the respect she deserves. And you would have real authority, not just the illusion of it. I am offering you partnership, Fletcher, not submission. I need to talk to Catherine, of course. Inside, Fletcher found Catherine settling Thomas in his cradle. She looked up when he entered, reading the conflict on his face. "What did he say?" Fletcher explained the offer, watching Catherine's expression shift from surprise to thoughtfulness. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "What do you want to do?" she finally asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him no to prove that we don't need him or his ranch. But another part," Fletcher sighed, "another part remembers how much I loved that land, how much I had planned to do with it, and I think about Thomas, about giving him a better life than we can provide here." "But this is our home," Catherine said. "We built this ourselves. I know. And we can keep it, use it as a summer place maybe, but Catherine, my father is right about one thing. Here we are always going to be struggling, just barely getting by. On the ranch we could build something real. Not just for us, but for Thomas, for any other children we have. Would you be happy there? After everything?" Fletcher considered the question carefully. "I think I could be if things were different. If my father really has changed, if you were welcomed and valued, then yes. I could be happy there, but only if you could be too." Catherine moved to the window, looking out at the homestead they had worked so hard to build. "I never wanted wealth or status," she said. "I just wanted to be with you, to build a life together. We have done that here. But I also want our children to have opportunities, to not struggle the way I did growing up. If your father is sincere, if he really has changed, then maybe this is the right choice. And if he hasn't, if we go back and he reverts to his old ways, then we leave again." Catherine turned to face him, her chin lifted in determination. "We have done it once. We can do it again if we have to, but Fletcher, I think he is sincere. I think losing you changed him." They talked long into the night, weighing options and discussing fears. Finally, as dawn approached, they made their decision. They would accept Reginald's offer, but with conditions. They would maintain ownership of the Oregon homestead as a backup plan. Catherine would have full authority to run the household as she saw fit, with no interference from Reginald. And most importantly, they could leave at any time, for any reason, without judgment or recrimination. Reginald agreed to everything without hesitation. "I will have papers drawn up," he said. "Legal documents that guarantee your rights and your share of the ranch. I want no misunderstandings." They spent a month preparing to leave, selling what they couldn't take, making arrangements with the Thompsons to watch over their land. It was bittersweet, leaving the place that had been their first real home together, but Fletcher knew it was the right decision. The journey back to California was far easier than the journey north had been. They traveled with wagons, plenty of supplies, and Reginald hired guards for safety. Thomas was 6 months old now, growing fast and starting to show personality. He smiled at everyone and seemed to enjoy the journey, fascinated by the horses and the changing scenery. They reached Columbia in early fall, as the heat of summer was beginning to ease. Fletcher had been gone for nearly a year and a half, and the town seemed both familiar and strange. People stared as they rode through, whispers following them, but Reginald rode beside them, his presence making clear that this return had his blessing. The ranch looked exactly as Fletcher remembered. Rolling grassland, sturdy buildings, everything well maintained and prosperous. But something was different too. Patrick Nolan came out of the barn to greet them, and Fletcher was shocked by how much older he looked. Catherine ran to her father, Thomas, in her arms, and Fletcher watched them embrace with tears in his eyes. "Welcome home, lad," Patrick said to Fletcher, shaking his hand firmly. "I told you that stubborn old goat would come around." The house Reginald had mentioned was beautiful, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows. Inside, Furniture waited under dust cloths, and everything was ready for a family to move in. Catherine walked through the rooms with wonder, touching the curtains, the polished wood floors, the indoor pump that brought water right into the kitchen. "It is too much," she whispered to Fletcher. "I feel like I don't belong here." "You belong wherever I am," Fletcher said firmly. "And this is ours, Catherine, fair and square, earned by leaving everything behind and proving we could make it on our own. My father knows that. Everyone knows that. Settling back into ranch life took adjustment." Fletcher had to relearn patterns he had grown up with, but now he had real authority to make changes. He implemented new breeding techniques he had read about, improved water management, and treated the ranch hands with more respect than his father had shown. Catherine won over the household staff with her competence and kindness, never pulling rank or acting superior despite her new position. The gossip took longer to die down. There were people in Columbia who would never accept Catherine, would always see her as the stable hand's daughter who had trapped a rancher's son. But Fletcher didn't care. He and Catherine attended church, went to town dances, and lived their lives openly and honestly. Gradually, more people came around, especially as they saw how hard Catherine worked and how devoted she and Fletcher were to each other. Reginald proved true to his word. He and Fletcher ran the ranch as partners, and while they didn't always agree, Reginald respected Fletcher's decisions. He also doted on Thomas, spending hours with his grandson, teaching him to ride almost before he could walk. Catherine softened toward her father-in-law as well, seeing the genuine love he had for Thomas and the respect he now showed her. 2 years after their return, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Fletcher's mother. Reginald wept when they told him, touching the baby's face with infinite gentleness. "She would have been so proud of you both," he said. "So proud of what you have built." The ranch thrived under Fletcher's management. He expanded carefully, making smart investments and building relationships with other ranchers and with the railroad companies that were expanding through California. Money came in steadily, and Fletcher made sure to save aggressively, always mindful of how quickly fortune could turn. But more than financial success, Fletcher found satisfaction in the life he and Catherine had created. They were partners in every sense, working together to manage the ranch and raise their growing family. A third child came, another boy they named Samuel, and then a fourth, a daughter named Margaret. Patrick Nolan lived long enough to see all his grandchildren, dying peacefully in his sleep when Thomas was 7. Fletcher and Catherine buried him in the small cemetery outside Columbia, next to the plot where Fletcher's mother lay. Reginald stood with them at the funeral, offering quiet support, and Fletcher realized his father had truly become a different man. Reginald himself lived another 15 years, working the ranch until the day he died at 75. He went out riding one morning and simply didn't come back. They found him by the creek on the northern boundary, the same creek where Fletcher and Catherine used to meet in secret all those years ago. He looked peaceful, and Fletcher liked to think his father had found contentment at last. The years rolled on. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as Fletcher did. Rose proved to have her mother's way with horses and became an accomplished rider. Samuel was the quiet one, happiest with books and numbers, and Fletcher encouraged him to pursue education beyond the ranch. Margaret was pure fire, fierce and determined, reminding Fletcher of Catherine at that age. Fletcher and Catherine watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror, guiding them through childhood scrapes and teenage dramas. They held firm rules but also gave freedom, trusting their children to make good choices and learning from mistakes. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Catherine riding to their old meeting spot by the creek. They were both in their late 40s now, graying and weathered but still strong. They dismounted and sat by the water, watching it flow over smooth stones. "You ever regret it?" Fletcher asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Leaving everything behind, taking such a huge risk?" "Never," Catherine said, leaning against his shoulder. "Best decision I ever made. We could have had a much easier life if I had just listened to my father from the start." "We could have had an easier life," Catherine agreed, "but we would not have had this life. This beautiful, messy, wonderful life we built together. Fletcher, when you came to my cabin that day and told me to choose, I was terrified. But I also knew that I would rather struggle with you than have ease with anyone else." "I love you," Fletcher said, kissing her temple. "I have loved you since the first time I saw you gentle a horse that everyone else said was too wild to train. You made it look easy, like love and patience could solve anything." "Love and patience and a lot of hard work," Catherine amended, laughing. "But yes, those things matter most." They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the California sky in shades of orange and gold. Then they rode home together, to the ranch that was theirs, to the children who filled their house with noise and life, to the future they had built from nothing but courage and love. Thomas took over the ranch when he was 30, with Fletcher transitioning to an advisory role. He watched his son implement new ideas, make his own mistakes, and gradually grow into leadership. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son, a good match that brought two properties together. Samuel became a teacher, moving to San Francisco but visiting regularly. Margaret married late, to everyone's surprise, choosing a quiet veterinarian who adored her fierce spirit. Grandchildren came, a parade of them, and Fletcher and Catherine settled into the joy of being grandparents. They could spoil and indulge without the daily weight of responsibility. They traveled some, visiting Margaret in Sacramento and Samuel in San Francisco, even taking one memorable trip back to Oregon to see their old homestead. The Thompsons still lived next door, and they spent a week reminiscing and marveling at how much had changed. Fletcher turned 70 in 1926, nearly 50 years after that fateful day when he had chosen love over inheritance. The family gathered for a celebration, 3 generations filling the ranch house with laughter and chaos. After dinner, Fletcher stood and raised his glass. "I want to say something," he began, and the room quieted. 70 years is a long time, long enough to learn a few things. I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. I have learned that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every single day. And I have learned that the best inheritance you can leave your children is not land or money, but the example of living honestly and loving fully." He looked at Catherine, who sat beside him with silver hair and smile lines around her eyes, still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. 48 years ago, I made a choice that seemed impossible at the time. I chose this woman over everything else in my world, and every day since then, I have been grateful for that choice. Catherine Lancaster, you are the great adventure of my life." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Catherine stood and kissed him, and their children and grandchildren applauded. Later, when the house had quieted and they were alone in their bedroom, Catherine took Fletcher's hand. "You remember what you said to me in that boarding house in Angel's Camp?" she asked. "The night before we got married, I said a lot of things. You said we would build something beautiful together, something that was ours." She gestured to encompass not just the room, but everything beyond it. "Fletcher Lancaster, you were right. Look at what we built." Fletcher pulled her close, marveling that after all these years, holding her still felt like coming home. "We built it together. That is the important part." They lived another 10 years together, growing old with grace and humor. Fletcher's body started to fail first, arthritis making the ranch work he loved increasingly difficult. Catherine developed a persistent cough that no doctor could quite cure, but they had each other, and they had the family they had created, and that was more than enough. Fletcher died first, quietly in his sleep one spring morning, just shy of his 80th birthday. Catherine followed 6 months later, as if she had simply been waiting to make sure everything was settled before joining him. They were buried side by side in the Columbia Cemetery, with a simple marker that read, Fletcher and Catherine Lancaster. Beloved parents and grandparents, they chose love. At Catherine's funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered crowd and told the story of how his parents had met, fallen in love, and defied the world to be together. He talked about the courage it took to start over with nothing, the determination required to build a life from scratch, and the love that sustained them through every hardship. My father once told me that the best thing he ever did was choose my mother, Thomas said, his voice breaking slightly. He said that everything else, all of this, he gestured at the prosperous ranch, the family filling the church pews, was just the natural result of that one right choice. He never looked back, never regretted, never wavered. And my mother loved him the same way, fiercely and completely until the very end. The legacy Fletcher and Catherine left was more than land or money. It was a family built on love and respect, a community enriched by their example, and a story that would be told for generations. Their grandchildren would tell their own children about the young cowboy who defied his father for love, and the brave woman who took a chance on a future with no guarantees. The ranch continued to thrive, passing through the Lancaster family line, but it was more than just a business. It was a testament to what two people could build when they committed fully to each other and to their shared vision. Every fence post, every building, every tree planted as a windbreak carried the echo of Fletcher and Catherine's determination and love. Years later, when Thomas was old himself and telling his great-grandchildren the family history, they would ask him what made his parents' love so special. And Thomas would smile and say, "It was simple, really." They understood that love is not about finding the perfect person or the perfect circumstances. It is about choosing someone and then choosing them again, every single day, no matter what life throws at you. My parents did that. They chose each other when it cost them everything, and they kept choosing each other until their last breaths. That is what made them special. That is what made their love a legend. And in that small cemetery outside Columbia, California, where two simple headstones marked the resting place of Fletcher and Catherine Lancaster, wildflowers grew in abundance. Local people said it was just the California soil, rich and fertile, but the family knew better. It was love, growing still, the kind of love that doesn't die but transforms into something beautiful that nourishes all who remember it. The young cowboy who chose love over inheritance, and the woman who chose courage over security, had built something that would last forever. Not in buildings or land, though those remained, but in the hearts of everyone they touched and in the example they set for generations to come. They proved that the greatest riches in life are not material, that the strongest foundation is built on love, and that choosing with your heart, even when it seems impossible, is always the right choice. Fletcher never looked back because he didn't need to. Everything he could ever want was ahead of him, in Catherine's smile and their children's laughter, in the life they built together day by day and year by year. And that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything.